Now, the last talk of the session is the organic future of bioelectronics. Aaron Weinroth.
I'm going to talk a little bit about Panaxium, the company that I work for, on the topic of the organic future of bioelectronics. So I'll explain a little bit about what we do and where we see things headed in the field. But I'm also mainly going to talk about technology commercialization in the medical industry in general, and hopefully, as I said, not repeat too much of what the past couple speakers have already addressed. Also, I recognize, as the last speaker towards the end of the day, after all this great content that's been delivered, our brains are starting to get a little tired, perhaps. So I'll try and throw in a few fun facts and other interesting little tidbits to keep it a little more entertaining for you as well. See if it works. As far as Panaxium's activities, I will talk about a bit in general, but I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about exactly specifically what we're working on and where we're headed, just because at this point some of that's still a little bit confidential. But I do hope you'll pay attention over the next while and watch for news and see where things are headed, or come back next time and look for some updates. I'll start with my disclosures in case you didn't figure that out already. I'm an employee of Panaxium. I always find it amusing at conferences, presenters will present their financial disclosures as if that's the only thing that could possibly influence their perspective on the world or bias the information that they're presenting. So to be a little bit more complete, we'll include a few other disclosures. I'm a biomedical engineer by background with a technology commercialization focus. So growing up, I was always good at math and science. I saw engineering as a good career path. I used to watch The $6 Million Man. You guys know that show? That's sort of, yeah, and The Bionic Woman also came later. It's always interesting. One of them, for those who have watched, one of them had bionic vision. They could see really well, and one of them had bionic hearing. They could hear. Do you know which was which? Was it the eye? What was? Yeah, it's easy to remember. No man has hearing that good. So it's easy to keep track. So that was sort of early inspiration, and got into that field. Over time, through my career, I've moved from sort of technology development, R&D, into more the business aspects, strategy aspects of technology commercialization with medical device. I've worked for some small companies. I've also worked for big companies after we've been acquired, so I've seen sort of both sides of working for a big established organization or working for a new startup. I've worked in electrophysiology, in image-guided surgery. I've done some things outside of the medical space in the optics industry as well. But now it's kind of nice coming back to bioelectronics and biomedicine. I'm Canadian. I don't know if that really influences much, but proud of it. But growing up with socialized medicine, that maybe does give a bit of a different perspective on things and what the needs are in healthcare and technology development. I enjoy math and logic, puzzles. That may seem completely irrelevant to my presentation until we get to the next slide. So in preparing for the presentation, I was giving some thought just in general, especially being the last speaker, how to kind of bring things together and look at the world overall. So it occurred to me, the theme of this conference is our bioelectronic future, right? And the talk that I was planning to give was on the organic future of bioelectronics. And so, given my math and engineering background, I realized if we take that title of my talk and rearrange the terms a little bit, we can set that up and set it up as an equation of bioelectronics being the organic future. If we take that and substitute it back into the main theme of the conference, we end up with our organic future. So that's interesting. I don't really know what that means. It's confusing, right? Because organic is the present and the past of medicine. To say that it's also the future. Maybe this whole bioelectronics using silicon devices is a transient phase in our development. We've gone from certainly the history of medicine has all been organic, and maybe the future will all be organic as well. Future, I don't know really what that would mean necessarily, but it gives us something to think about. Really, kind of makes your head spin a little bit if you try and go out too far into that. But knowing that the accuracy of predictions about the future, I think Derek said something about not being able to do that with any great degree of accuracy. The farther out you go, the less accurate it's going to be. So I'm going to stick to more near-term developments. It actually also makes me think, with that substitution on the last slide, maybe there was something wrong in the math because it doesn't necessarily make sense what you get with the answer. I don't know if any of you have seen, there's like a mathematical proof where you can show that 2 is equal to 1 by going through a series of mathematical steps, and somehow you figure out that, well, that's the answer I got, but it doesn't make sense. I don't know why. Anyway, we'll come back to that. And I will, if we should have some time, talk a little bit also about, give a couple more examples when it comes to predicting the future. Anyway, predicting the future is hard, very uncertain, but creating the future is a little bit more deterministic, especially if you take an active role in trying to get to where you want to be. And if you want to head to a certain future that you want to create, the first step is really having some vision of what that future looks like. So I figured I would take a shot at some vision of what the future will be when we get there, this bioelectronic future that we're talking about. And I came up with this statement. So electricity, being one of the most powerful stimulants, its effects may be considered both general and local, is frequently used both as a preventative and cure of many diseases. Sound good? Is that a reasonable, when we get to this bioelectronic world of ours, that will be a fair statement? Does anyone disagree? Okay, seemed pretty good to me. I won't take any offense either way because I didn't actually make that up myself. I paraphrased it from this source. We have here, the language might seem a little bit out of date, but the general theme really hasn't changed. Electricity being one of the most powerful stimulants, promotes free circulation of the blood, increases all sorts of physiological parameters, frequently used to cure disease. This list is rather amusing, but some of them actually aren't so strange. Rheumatism, we've got VNS therapy for all kinds of arthritis, rheumatoid, inflammatory response type stuff, so that's been checked off the list. We've got epilepsy on there, headaches, tumors. All these things are actually now real bioelectronic medicine types of applications. And of course, the end there, it's been found to be effective in rescuing people from drowning and suffocation. So there you've got your defibrillator and other types of devices. So not bad. Anyone want to guess when this was from? How far back we go? What's that, yeah? That would be a good guess, yeah. So I mean, reasonable, sure. Anyone want to know for sure? This book was written in 1806, over 200 years ago. And it's funny, I mean, that vision of the future 200 years ago is really not that much different than our vision of the future today. So it's somewhat humbling that we haven't, not that we haven't made progress, but that we're not necessarily any smarter than those who have come before us. We just maybe have some better tools at our disposal for actually creating the things that we want to create. I thought this was funny because Jason earlier talked about, what was it, the ancient dreams, this ancient vision of what the future of bioelectronics would look like, and he was quoting things from 2002. So if the ancient was 2002, I'm not sure where 1806 gets us. So yeah, even a little bit farther back. And it was only a couple of years after this that Mary Shelley's Frankenstein came out, but that was more science fiction than real medicine, so I didn't want to reference that. In any case, things have definitely come a long way since 1806. Bioelectronic medicine is no longer just a vision of the future, but it's very much in the present. Electrical implants are commonly used. We have pacemakers for our hearts. There's nerve stimulators for treating pain. We now have all kinds of implants in the brain. We have cochlear implants. We have DBS. For these types of implanted nerve stimulators, the estimated market is about $19 billion. So that's certainly a very real present world. And there's all kinds of other therapies being investigated and developed. The The estimate, if you look at all these other conditions that could be treated with bioelectronic medicine, either new things or things that are currently treated with drugs that you could switch, something in the range of $250 billion a year. And this is really talking about implanted stimulators. Then you have other things with bioelectronics, using electricity to burn tumors or for muscle therapy or for all kinds of other applications that would add on top of that. You have companies like Google getting involved in bioelectronic medicine. With their spin-off, you have Facebook talking about wanting to do 100 word per minute non-invasive speech interface. You have Elon Musk investing in this space. You have Brian Johnson setting up Kernel with his $100 million investment. So this is a very, very active area. The developments, not only are there a lot of people involved, but the developments are happening fast. Just to give a couple of examples, this was from November 29th, so a couple days ago. Electrical stimulation of a specific part of the brain to improve symptoms of depression. It was a successful trial. I know we heard yesterday about a lot of unsuccessful DBS for depression. This one just from a couple days ago, looking a lot more promising. Also, November 29th, new research in the area of prosthetic interfaces. This is for patients who have phantom limb pain. They discovered they can actually take advantage of that residual phantom limb presence in the patient to improve prosthetic interface work. So when you try and talk about what's the latest development, it's really sort of up to the minute, late changing. If I looked at my inbox today, I could probably find a couple more new examples. There's really daily basis of advancements in this field. Earlier this week, I was in New Orleans for the American Epilepsy Society annual meeting. I missed the end of it to come here. That was okay. But as an example, on Tuesday, so I was already had arrived here, there was a skills workshop on neuromodulation in epilepsy. This was not a research symposium presenting latest results of some new trial, a new device. This is standard of practice, standard of care. And not just that there's one type of neuromodulation. They were presenting on vagus nerve stimulation, deep brain stimulation, responsive neurostimulation. This is now well established. In fact, it's so well established, there was a separate session on new coding. We talked about, or we've heard talk about reimbursement and the importance of that. And so again, this is not research or clinical trial or IDE. These are approved devices that have billing codes, established practice for surgery, for management, for maintenance. It's very much reached the point of standard of care. So what's happened? What's really been bringing this together and promoting all the recent developments? Well, huge progress that's been made in just the basic neuroscience, understanding electrophysiology and the effects of neurostimulation. All the progress that's happened with microelectronic design and fabrication. You saw some really nice examples of that progression in Kurt's presentation just before this. Recent developments on the material science side, and that's what I'm going to focus on most when I talk about Panaxium's work, and huge investment in this field, both from government and from industry and from entrepreneurs that's pushing this forward. So when I say that the real advancement primarily is not that we have better ideas about what to do with bioelectronic medicine, but we just have better tools to work with. I thought I was gonna like shock you all and surprise you with the first bioelectronic tool, but Anna sort of ruined that by putting in her presentation. But we'll see who was paying attention. Who knows what the first bioelectronic tool was in recorded history, as far as what I've been able to dig up? Well, the tool, not the technique, but the actual device, the instrument, the electric fish. Any idea when the first recorded example or the documented evidence of bioelectronic medicine would have been? Wait, I showed you 1806. It's already in the textbooks. All right. So 46 AD, we had a publication, a Compositishka, I don't know. It's Latin. I've never been good at Latin. But Scribonius Largus, he was a Roman physician, and he recorded the use of the torpedo fish, which was like an electric eel type fish, for treating headaches and gout. That was in 46 AD. So wow, goes back a lot farther than maybe we would have expected. The next real advance in tools and bioelectronics would have been like the Leyden jar, so 1746, a more controlled way for storing and delivering an electric pulse, electric stimulation. Lots of other stuff, more modern tools beyond that. I won't go into all the details, but that brings us to what I really want to talk about today, which is organic bioelectronic materials. So what are those? Organic chemistry was really kicked off, I guess 1806 was when the term was first used, referring to the molecules, the structures that make up of living things. Our understanding of that has evolved a little bit. Now organic, in terms of organic chemistry, generally refers to compounds carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, silicon-based. Glucose being a really good example of that. Going from molecules to polymers. So polymers are chains of units that repeat. So if you look at glucose as an organic molecule, then starch would be a polymer made up of repeating glucose units. And then things get more interesting with the organic conducting polymers. So the first one, polyacetylene, was discovered in 1977, and eventually the researchers who came up with that were awarded a Nobel Prize for it. And these are polymer structures that, due to their properties, are able to conduct electricity. So generally, when we talk about organic bioelectronics now, we're referring to devices that make use of these organic conducting polymers. Why does that matter? Well, medical devices, electronic circuits, generally work with electrons flowing through wires. Pretty straightforward. And we tend to think of the body's nervous system as being an electronic control system. But it's not exactly electrons flowing through wires. There is some electron transport, but primarily the body's communication signaling is with ions flowing through membranes. So these devices or these materials using organic bioelectronics are very beneficial because not only do they conduct electricity, but they can also conduct ions. They have these mixed properties where not only can the electrons flow through the materials, but ions can flow in and out from the materials, which gives a really nice boost to the sensitivity when you're trying to interface between a biological ionic system and an electronic electron flow system. Also, because these are organic materials, you don't have to worry too much about triggering an immune response or foreign body response in the body, so that makes them really nice for long-term implanted type applications. As polymer structures, they're very stable, highly durable in a biological environment, so that also makes them good for long-term applications. They're soft and flexible materials, so a good mechanical match between tissue and the device, so you don't have to worry about causing damage from your rigid probe that you might be inserting. And then when it comes to Panaxium's unique capabilities in this space is the ability to fabricate devices using lithographic processing. So these materials tend to be somewhat sensitive to the chemistry that's usually used in photolithography or other nanofabrication approaches. But we have some unique chemistry that's been developed for lithographic processing of these materials, so we can make very fine, highly structured pattern devices, not only fine electrode arrays, but more active devices like transistors, OACTs, other things. We can functionalize them to respond to certain molecules more than others. So all sorts of interesting things that can be done with them from the medical device space. And the applications really are quite numerous. There's things in the central nervous system. We've heard a lot about brain interfaces at the conference so far. Peripheral nervous system as well, lots of potential, whether for prosthetic applications or pain applications or other sorts, vagus nerve stimulation even. And even beyond the nervous system itself, there's a lot of other electrically active organs. I mean, the heart and the gut are both very electrically active. There's all kinds of other organ systems that can be modulated and will respond to electrical stimulation. You can use bioelectronics to kill unwanted tissue in oncology and in cancer. So all sorts of things that could be done, and many of these that we're exploring now. So the light bulb kind of goes off. Here's these wonderful new materials. Here's all these applications that could benefit from organic bioelectronic materials, and the rest, as they say, is history, right? It's a little bit more complicated than that, obviously, and we'll talk about that journey a little bit. But really what kicked it off was the recognition that there's all this good research that's been done with these materials, even exploring some of the biological applications a little bit. And when you look around to say what's happening with it next, it's kind of sitting there on the shelf. The researchers have moved on to the next interesting research project, and the opportunity is there to take it out and actually make it into something real, to apply it. There was also a comment earlier in the conference, is there an obligation for researchers to make sure to carry through, bring their devices to market? The answer, I think, was maybe, maybe not. But we certainly saw the opportunity of research sitting on the shelf that had great potential to move forward. So it's pretty straightforward from there, right? Great technology, there's a clinical need in the market, smooth sailing all the way, obviously. I've always liked this picture. I don't know who created it in the first place. It shows up on social media every now and then. But it's really very true. It's never as simple as you think it's going to be. So we'll talk a little bit about what that journey looks like. Phase one, right? Raise some money, maybe win a startup competition at your university or local institution. It's interesting because the profile of an investor in a medical technology venture is sometimes very different than a conventional, say, tech investor or investor in any other kind of business. There tends to be a longer time horizon in developing a new medical technology and seeing a return on investment. So you need somebody with the right profile and the right patience to be involved with that. Create a company. So in Panaxium's case, it was a little bit, it's kind of interesting. The company founders were based in Canada. The investors that were brought on board to participate were in Canada. So it made sense for us to have sort of a business office in Canada. But one of the leading research groups working on these organic bioelectronics was located in France. And so the company was actually incorporated in France, very close to the research team that had been developing these organic materials and devices. In order to make use of some of the shared research facilities at the institution where they were located, as well as to be able to hire a lot of the graduates coming out of that program and make them part of the technology team. What else do you need to do? You need a business plan. You probably need that before raising money, at least to a certain extent. Securing access to the core technology when it comes to the academic projects. Can you get license to the IP? Can you fix the IP? That we heard earlier, that sometimes the university IP isn't quite as solid as you would like it to be. Are there steps you can take to reinforce that? Supply agreements with various people in the field that you can make sure that you have access to. Build up the team and start exploring the technology capabilities. What you see in a research institution, what you've seen in the publications, you want to kind of try it out for yourself. See just how far you can take it, understand the advantages and the strengths, and know where it goes. And start exploring collaborations on the technology. There's usually other people you can work with. In our case, there were several really good institutions that all had work that we wanted to make use of. And of course, start to explore the applications to match things up. Right? You really need a great technology as one piece, having a clinical need. You need to find the intersection between those two. Those two aren't enough. You also needed some kind of economic value proposition if you want to have an actual business venture that you can carry forward and put all those pieces together. So phase two, raise more money. Because usually by this point, that's the stage that you're at. Revise your business plan. If your business plan doesn't change at some point between your initial concept to when you actually get to where you're going, that's impressive. Chances are maybe you're not even paying attention and you don't realize that it needs to be changed, because quite often there's going to be new information that comes in during your development that you need to take into account. Continue to build the team, continue to optimize the technology, and start validating your applications. And that can be very tricky, especially in the medical device field. It's not like you can just make your minimally viable product and take it out and start trying it in humans and see what happens. But there are things that you can do. You go out, you talk to people. You can't just ask, is this good? Is this not good? There isn't always a vocabulary for people to talk about these things when it's something brand new and novel. You often have to observe more than you just listen, because what people say they want or say they need doesn't always match with when you watch what they're doing, what actually fits in to what they're doing. And then looking at all the applications you identify, you have to figure out, okay, which ones are we going to do in which order? Do we want to make a research device first before we go and do full-scale clinical devices? Do we want to go after a smaller application with a greater need, or an application with a bigger opportunity that maybe the value add isn't quite as significant? And there's all kinds of trade-offs between those. Develop your technology capabilities. Again, usually what you have is not enough to make a product. One cool technology on its own probably doesn't get you far. So if you have a cool new material, you also need the electronics to go with that. You need the signal processing, data analytics to go with that. You probably need some kind of service delivery. How are you going to train people? How are you going to support people? So you start looking for partners that can help with different parts of the overall capital P product as opposed to the lowercase p product, the complete solution that you want to deliver. Figure out what you want to do. Are you going to make the component, or are you going to make the full device? Figure out who's going to help you on the clinical side for how to develop it. You get to phase 3, and these are not hard and fast. Not every development follows the same pattern, but generally speaking, it goes along these lines. Raise more money. You may be noticing a trend here. Revise your business plan. Build the team. These are things that happen continuously as you go through. But now you're at a stage where you really need to, you've decided on your applications, you really need to define what those products look like more specifically. Work on your regulatory strategy. Is there a predicate device you can use? How are you going to prove that this works well? How are you going to demonstrate the value of your product? That's also very important. You have to remember, while you're out there spending all your money on your clinical trials, if at the same time you can also use the same experience to validate the economic value, the outcome value of your device, that's also very important. And start things towards quality systems and clinical trials. Phase 4, again, raise more money, revise your business plan, build the team. But now you're actually making your products. You're running your clinical trials. You've got to work on things like your sales channel, work on reimbursement, work on regulatory approvals. There's all kinds of things we can talk about that. The past speakers gave some good examples, so we'll kind of skip over it a little bit. And this is really how it goes. You execute, you repeat, you refine your products. You find new applications. You take your existing product into a new application. You find new products for the applications where you're already doing work. Eventually, there may be some kind of exit strategy for a small startup. You get acquired. We know there's a lot of consolidation in the medtech industry. You should never start a company because you're planning to sell it. You should start a company because you think it's a good business. Right? If your eventual exit is you get acquired, great. Nothing wrong with that. If eventually you create a big, stable, revenue-generating organization, that's great too. There's all kinds of options on the exit strategy, but you can't always begin with the end in mind. You need to begin with something that you think is worthwhile. This slide we kind of saw in the last talk. I will point out, in addition, it's complicated, right? In a typical consumer device, you have something really cool, and you have somebody who wants your thing that's really cool, so you sell it to them, they write you a check, everything's good. It doesn't quite work that way in medical device. There's many different stakeholders. Oftentimes, they have conflicting interests. And oftentimes, they change over time. Some of the biggest challenges in healthcare are related to the fact that there's mixed incentives in the system. So something like preventive medicine. The payer who's responsible for the patient today, when you ask them to pay for care now that will prevent more expensive care later, it's hard for them because it's not going to be their responsibility to pay for that more expensive care later. So you find all these situations where the cost and the value don't end up accruing to the same stakeholders within the system. And it's challenging. So if I pay a lot of money for a procedure now that will prevent you from having a worse condition later, well, it's going to be some other insurer's problem. You're going to be on Medicare by then. You're going to have switched jobs. It's going to be somebody else. You'll have moved. So there's all these weird incentives in the system that you have to be aware of when looking at the opportunities. Healthcare is risk averse, and for good reason. So we're going to do some more math here. We know that something different is bad. That's how healthcare sees things, right? Also, we know that if something is better, then by definition it's different. Because if it's not different, it can't possibly be better. So again, little substitution of terms here. Therefore, better equals bad. Again, seems weird, right? 2 equals 1. How does that work? Can't possibly make sense, but it's true in the healthcare industry. You have to be aware of what you're going to be compared against. And you're going to be compared against something. Often it's easier to come out with an application for something where there is no current treatment. There's no gold standard to be compared against, rather than try and have an incremental improvement to something that already exists because of considerations like this and inertia. Clinical evidence. This is just a great, some of you are probably familiar with this one. So you need to generate evidence to show that your device works. But things like a brain-machine interface for patients with paralysis, like what are you going to do in terms of a randomized controlled study I don't know what that would look like. This was a satirical article that was in the British Medical Journal in 2003. Somebody arguing that nobody had ever done proper randomized controlled trials showing that parachutes are effective in preventing major trauma during gravitational challenge. Amazing article, you should read it. But they end by saying that those strong proponents of evidence-based medicine who say you should never do anything without having strong randomized controlled double-blind evidence, maybe those people would like to volunteer for the control arm of the study. So we'll see, you never know. Social acceptability, this is interesting, because yesterday there was a comment like, why would somebody with poor vision not want glasses, right? Everybody should take that. Why would somebody with vision loss not want a retinal implant? Why would somebody with no hearing not want a cochlear implant? But I'll give you the counterexample, which is the hearing aid. Why would somebody with poor hearing not want a hearing aid? Or why would somebody who has trouble walking not want a cane? Have any of you tried to get an elderly relative to accept a hearing aid or a cane? Glasses are okay, but there's a lot of social taboo around certain medical conditions and medical treatments. I love that video in the last presentation of the hearing aid and all these advanced functions, right? We can go beyond not just restoring function in people with disability, but maybe even enhancing function to the point where it's not a social stigma to have this device. Everybody wants this because they can talk to their loved ones wirelessly and get directions. And I mean, you can do a lot of that with your phone and a Bluetooth headset today, but the point is, give it some thought. What can we do in the medical technology industry, not just to give a solution, a device, a cream-colored square box, but something that looks like it belongs, something that people aren't going to be embarrassed to be seen and wearing. I'll skip this because we're short on time here. One thing that comes up also, system complexity, right? We don't really understand how the brain works. How are we going to fix it when we don't even know how it works in the first place or how it's supposed to work? You look at something like deep brain stimulation. Okay, well, we stick a probe in, and it seems to do stuff, or but what is it that's having the effect? Is it the mechanical presence of something? We've poked a hole in some of the neurons. Is it the electrical stimulation that's doing it? Is there a thermal effect? Is there some kind of electrochemical process happening by the presence of this probe? We don't really fully understand what our devices are necessarily doing. And so we need to work on that and develop that a little bit better. Lots of other challenges. I will say, we've talked about a bunch of them. A couple quick ones. Sample bias. It tends to be with these new technologies and new devices. The patients that we're allowed to develop the technologies with and for are usually the ones that don't have any other options. There's this real sample bias in the patient population. So there's some work I did in interventional oncology. The only patients we could really do trials with on our device were the ones who failed on medication, weren't candidates for surgery. Very, very similar to what happens in epilepsy field. But then you question the outcomes. Why are the outcomes bad? Well, the outcomes are bad because these are the patients that were sort of the worst patients to start with. So there's a bit of an unfair comparison and things like that. Mismatched pace is going to be very challenging in medical device commercialization. The speed of technology development doesn't match with the speed of clinical adoption. It doesn't meet the speed of regulatory approval. So you'll often see these devices that come up in the clinic and they look like they're 20 years old. And the reason for that is because you have these uneven timelines. Technology is developing all the time. I showed you earlier, on a daily basis, there's new things that come out. But when you're developing a medical device and you're getting regulatory approval for a medical device, you have to lock it in. And you have to lock it in 3, 5, 10 years before that device reaches the market. It's somewhat obsolete by the time it gets there, but you can't continuously iterate or you'll never have a finished regulatory approved device that you can put into the clinic. And just one last comment on this one. First impressions really matter. A lot of people, they want to get something to market quick. But there's a real danger that if you bring something that's not ready to market, you're going to pollute the water, so to speak, for the real innovations that can follow. It's a risk that we have to be aware of. I don't want to sound too negative. There's a lot of challenges, but there's also a lot of opportunity. This was a good report on diffusion of innovation in healthcare. You can look it up sometime. It's a great one. And just wrapping up, talking about the future, because we've spent a lot of time the last couple of days looking forward. We have to also remember the future isn't always good just because it's the future, right? Innovation for the sake of innovation isn't always a good thing. We have to, the ethics guys are nodding their heads. We really have to consider not just the narrow view of what we're doing, but the greater social impact of the innovation. The ends don't justify the means necessarily, right? It's not just about quality of life. We have to look at overall quality in society. Who might get left behind by some of the innovation that we're trying to introduce? And quality of life and meaningful life aren't necessarily the same thing. Future Shock, that's I think from the 1970s or something. It was a great book. And more recently, it's just a couple years old, Trees on Mars, also looks at this obsession with the future. And we had a comment earlier about how in universities they're all pushing innovation, spin-off, commercialization, and maybe there's a bit of an overemphasis there. I have some fun quotes here that show that predicting the future is horribly inaccurate, especially when it comes to skepticism about the opportunity for medical innovation. But I'm out of time, so I'm going to skip that. You can take a look at them later. Some other good ones here you can read quickly of some failed predictions in the technology field in particular, always somewhat amusing. And last but not least, I told you I like the math. So very quickly, I'm going to prove to you that 2 equals 1. And 20 years from now, you won't remember a thing I said except for this slide. So that's the reason I'm doing it. So if we start off, let A equals B. If we multiply both sides by A, then A squared equals B squared. If we subtract B squared from both sides, perfectly valid mathematical operations, we get A squared minus B squared equals AB minus B squared. We can factor both of those. So factor the left side to A minus B times A plus B. Factor the right side, you pull out the B times A minus B. You can divide both sides by the A minus B term. They cancel out. You're left with A plus B equals B. We know A equals B, so we can substitute that back in. 2B equals B. Therefore, 2 equals 1. And I challenge any of you to prove me wrong. So if you already know it, then yes. Oh, did you get it? Yes, so that is the fallacy. So we did divide by 0. But hopefully, our organic future is not an incorrect mathematical substitution like this one. And we will get there and see it. Thank you.
Any questions?
Anything?
So I'm familiar with organic electronics, in the research space. What's attractive about these materials for commercialization?
Well, it's the same thing. I mean, the advantages that I presented there are all direct benefits for long-term bioelectronic interfaces.
I mean, I guess is there one thing that stands out, like the processability that you can, like their cost, stability may be worse, right? Than so is there one property that you find is more important, I guess, for the kind of work your company's doing?
Well, it's the combination. I mean, if you were to say, okay, what do I want in my bioelectronic interface, from my medical device to either to measure or to stimulate with the system, I want something that's going to blend in nicely with the biological system, so mechanical match, immune, foreign body type concerns in the response, something durable that's going to hold up. You'd really describe something very much like this material. The biggest advantage is going to be the fact that it has this mixed electronic and ionic conductivity. So that gives you a real boost in signal, especially as you start to shrink the size of your device. A typical electrode, it's really a function of surface area, correlates with your impedance. With these devices, it's more about volume. So you can shrink down your sort of contact points without sacrificing your signal quality as much. And so miniaturization, and again, sticking things in the body and leaving there long-term, these are the right types of materials to use. There's all kinds of other materials that we saw today, and I think some yesterday as well, that are really kind of neat. I'm very interested in learning a bit more about those. Fortunately, it ties into one of my later points that you can't continuously look for the newest and the latest and the greatest. If you're always adopting the newer technology, you never get the chance to actually make something as a complete device. A disadvantage of being on the industry side in commercialization as opposed to in the research side where you can always look for those ongoing developments and continuous innovation.
So I suspect this will turn out to be more of a comment than a question, but I remember hearing a few years ago about an interesting situation of somebody who was a definite early adopter of somebody who was desperate, to be one of the first volunteers for an early version of one of the first visual prosthetics that was available at a clinical study. And what this individual was able all of a sudden to discern blocks of light from blocks of darkness, which was, a massive improvement for him in terms of his visual acuity. But it turned out that, he was not able to distinguish between an open subway car door and the space between two subway cars. And that would have been a very easy discrimination to make with any of the standard apparatus that he would have used previously, a cane or a dog. But now with this fancy new implant, he could not make that discrimination, and that's a life and death kind of discrimination. So one of the challenges, of course, for us in this space is always to make sure that we take care of those trade-offs, right? That we take care to make sure that we're not sacrificing the good enough for something that's shiny and new, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Right. That was my question.
But I'll comment on that because it's absolutely it's not about having a new cool technology and deploying a new technology. It's about the outcome. It's what can you actually accomplish and achieve from a patient value perspective. It's interesting because you reminded me of something when you started talking about like the early adopter. I remember when it came to cochlear implants, in the early days, and maybe Kurt can confirm or deny this, what I heard was that they would only ever operate on one side, even for a patient where deafness in both ears, because they knew it was early technology, and they knew there would be improvements and new devices and things coming that are better, so they would put it on one side because of the benefit that you would get, but they wanted to preserve the other ear intact so that when something better came, they would still have the opportunity for that patient. I don't know where Kurt's sitting. Is that correct, or is that sort of an urban legend?
It's close, actually. So, part of what they were doing in that case is the surgery was much more involved in early days, but it would be a typical thing to do that they would actually implant the worst hearing ear, even though you would expect that to be your worst electrical hearing outcome, typically, so as to preserve whatever there is in terms of acoustic function on the other side. So yeah, there was a lot of conscientiousness around all of this and a lot of thought that went into it.
Yeah. I wonder if we'll see that with retinal implant. We'll start seeing patients who get one eye and not the other because, getting one eye, the technology is getting okay. It's good enough that you could use it, but, let's keep the other one in reserve for 5-10 years down the road when the technology gets even better. Who knows? It's an interesting question of how to address.
In Innovator's Dilemma says you fall into a trap of comparing a new technology with the gold standard, even though the new technology has only been out a year or two, and you got to give it, the stick and the dog have been around for 100 years. You have to give it some time to mature as well. When the Wright Flyer first... Huh?
You walk between those subway cars, you don't have 100 years to wait around.
There are martyrs for every cause. You have to make that decision and decide, hey, this is a brand new technology, I'm going to use my stick and this. When the Wright brothers first flew 852 feet and announced to the world, not a single journal, newspaper, or periodical picked it up. They thought, man, I could ride that far on my horse faster and easier.
Right, well, there's a Henry Ford, quote attributed to Henry Ford that
apocryphal.
I know, but it's still a good one.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
He said if I asked my customers what they wanted, they would have asked for a faster horse.
Yeah,
right?
he never said it. That actually appeared in a McKinsey report in 1993.
Is that who started?
It's the first
Is that who
place,
picked it up? Yeah.
And they said it's a theft, and then it turned into somebody did a deep dig on that.
Yeah.
If I'd asked my customers what they wanted, I would have worked on a faster horse.
Yeah, they would have asked for a faster horse. Because there's no vocabulary. If you're doing something that's really novel, really new, there's no vocabulary for it. Somebody can't ask for something that doesn't have a name, right? You have to create it and show it. And
the real quote, though, is Steve Jobs, who says, "I'm not interested in what my customer thinks they want. I need to show them what they need." Yeah,
there's a mix. So in our field, you really do have to involve the patients and take that into account. But if you only ever listen to that one perspective, you're going to miss out on things that don't occur to people, right? You have to push the boundaries. We need people doing crazy stuff like Elon Musk and saying you say I can't do it. Oh yeah, well watch me. I might fail, but I'm going to at least push that envelope out.
All right, great. Thank you very much.